been talking a lot about immigration interviews just because USCIS is pretty much requiring interviews for almost all types of applications for green card and citizenship. And I'll talk more about it just because I think it's an evolving thing. Now that they're going back to this policy of requiring interviews, whereas in the past they've waived them, people should be preparing more because I think as immigration is ramping up to interview more and more applicants for their immigration cases, they're also refining and fine-tuning how they're conducting these interviews. So I'll share what my experiences have been in the last week or two with interviews that I've been going on with my clients. So, things that I'm noticing that immigration is doing now is, for marriage interviews, they're being a lot more thorough. So, expect a heightened level of scrutiny when it comes to eligibility to adjust status, not just that whether or not the marriage is bona fide or genuine, but even if the officer is satisfied that the marriage is real, then there's also been a heavy focus on the eligibility to adjust status. So, what do I mean? So the more detailed questions that I've been hearing a lot of immigration officers ask of my clients are, very kind of fine, like very fine questions about um, the spouses. How well do they know each other? So I'm hearing questions being asked to the U.S. citizen spouse. Do you know your husband or your wife's immigration history? What kind of a visa did they have when they entered the US? How long did they have this visa? That's something that I used to hear every now and then, but now I'm noticing it's being asked a lot more, right? Um, Other things are address history, where was your partner living at the time that you met them? And maybe they met them 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but you know, now there's this kind of added expectation that you should know where exactly the address where your spouse lived when you met them. So I think they're just kind of like drilling down and getting more granular with their questions. Whereas before, most of the questions at the interview kind of um, revolved around, you know, whether you knew your spouse's family, have you met your in-laws, things like that. What does your spouse do for a living? But now they are kind of going into more and more areas. So just be on the lookout for that. I mean, in some cases, they are really turning them into quasi Stokes interviews. A Stokes interview is one where USCIS separates both spouses and interviews them individually, and they ask a whole list of questions just to test if the relationship is real. They interview each spouse separately, and then at the end of the two separate interviews, they'll bring both spouses back, and then they'll compare the answers. And if there are any inconsistencies, they'll ask, they'll give both spouses the opportunity to clarify or explain why there are these discrepancies. But pretty much at the end, immigration will then make a decision whether or not um, they believe that the couple are in a real marriage. So I've seen a few marriage adjustment interviews, um, kind of like morph into a semi-Stokes interview. The couple might not be physically separated from each other, but the level of questioning is almost as detailed as the Stokes interview. Um, and the other thing is regarding the I-485 application, the adjustment. the officers are really focusing more on those questions and really kind of spending more time going over the many questions that appear on the adjustment form and really, really asking details, So even if a question is a yes, no answer, there are more follow-up questions from the officer. So just be really careful about that. If there's any kind of issues that you may have regarding your eligibility to adjust, I really recommend, if you don't already have an immigration lawyer representing you, to consult with a lawyer and to think about having an attorney with you at the interview. Because more and more these interviews are getting adversarial in nature. Um, and they're not supposed to be, right? You're applying for a benefit. Immigration, the last word in immigration's name is services, right? But they don't really seem to be viewing their mission as merely administering benefits to people. They're more like um, looking for reasons to not approve, right? At this point. So just really be prepared for your upcoming interview. Um, for my clients, I go with them to all of their interviews because I want to make sure that I know who is the officer who's doing the interview. I always write down the name in case we need to follow up. So that's one tip is, whether or not you decide to have an interview by yourself or with an attorney, you can always, and you should always take down the name of the officer. They are supposed to inform you who they are, right? At the very least, they should give you their last name. Like here in New York and New Jersey, most officers have their name somewhere in their office, whether it's on a nameplate on their door or their desk. If you don't see it, ask for it because they're supposed to display it. Other advice, obviously, answer the truth always because this interview, before anything happens, before the officer can even start asking you questions, they're going to have you swear an oath that everything that you say is the truth. So you're kind of bound by whatever you say. Um, so when I prep my clients for their interviews, I always tell them this. You have to tell the truth, right? Don't ever lie. If you're not sure what the answer to a question is, it's better to just say, I don't know, or I don't remember. Never say something that you think the officer wants to hear. That's never a good idea. Um, there are times when, you know, you may not be sure what the officer is asking you. If they're asking you something and it's unclear, or if they throw around a word that you don't understand, you know, there's nothing wrong with just asking the officer, can you repeat the question or can you rephrase the question? I don't understand what this word means, right? Um, and more often than not, when I prep my clients, uh, a lot of clients will just kind of feel pressure to answer a question, even if they don't fully understand what a word means, just maybe because they're embarrassed to admit that they don't know what a word means, but don't be embarrassed. Immigration law has, uses certain terminology that may not be familiar to everybody, right? So, for example, some words that appear on immigration forms include, espionage, polygamy, um, totalitarian government, right? Not everyone may know what those words mean, so just ask. Espionage basically means you plan to spy against the government. Some officers will be nice and they will know that not every applicant will know what these words mean, but if the officer doesn't explain what a word means, then you can always say, I don't know what that word means. Please tell me what you mean by that. The last thing you want to do is guess at what a word means and be completely wrong, and then you end up answering a question that ends up hurting your application. Um, Another tip is if you have an attorney, um, be upfront with your attorney and do not omit any information or any issues in your case, because one way or the other, it will come out. So I had an interview recently where a client filed their application on their own without an attorney. And then later on, they decided to hire me to kind of continue with the case and also represent them when the interview came around. So that's what happened. Um, I went with the client to the interview, and it turns out that something serious happened at their previous immigration interview, um, which was an adjustment application. I was hired to attend a naturalization interview. The client never told me about what happened at this interview. And as a result, at the naturalization interview, it all came out, you know, the cat was let out of the bag. And then before I knew it, this officer then started asking my questions about things that happened in the past that I had no idea about. And the end result is that because of the client's failure to disclose details that should have been disclosed both to immigration and to their immigration lawyer, now his case is being reviewed by USCIS, and there's a chance that the application could be denied. So, you know that certain things are a red flag when the Immigration Service conducts a formal interrogation, right? And they have a written transcript of all the questions and how someone answered, and then they then further take the steps of having an applicant sign off on the Q&A that happened at an interview. So if this ever has happened to anyone in the past, they should absolutely inform their immigration officer and their immigration attorney, because now this is on their record permanently, right? And even if immigration ultimately approved the application after such an interrogation took place, it doesn't mean that it's no longer an issue ever again in the future. Um, Immigration thought it was serious enough that they had the client sign off on the questions that it posed. So don't assume that just because your adjustment was approved after this questioning, that it is not ever relevant again to any future applications, such as for naturalization. So just be very careful. These days immigration is looking um, for reasons to not approve applications more than any other time.